Hello there, thrill seekers, and good day to you. I keep finding these nice shirts at Ross Dress for Less. So, my last few shirts I've worn on this show have been from Ross Dress for Less. And at Ross Dress for Less last night, I found this garden statue thingy of a person doing zazen. The hands are even in the correct position. And when I was asking my wife, hey, let's get this, she's like, well, where are you going to put that? And she had a good point. I don't know where I'd put it. But I thought it was neat that Ross Dress for Less carries a statue of somebody doing zazen. Could mean something, I don't know. So, the other day, I said something on some social media platform. It might have been Twitter or somewhere else or Facebook. But I made the statement, if sitting still for a long time was an easy thing to do, they wouldn't build giant statues of people whose main accomplishment was being able to sit still for a long time. And of course, I was referring to Buddha, and the idea of this statement, this isn't the first time I've said this, is a lot of people find doing zazen to be difficult, and they are surprised that it's difficult, and they imagine that there are other people out there, or everybody out there, like most people out there, for whom this is easy to do, and for them it's really, really hard. And why is it so hard for me to do zazen when presumably the thought is that everybody else is having an easy time of it? Well, it's not easy, and that's my point. It's difficult to sit still. Who was the philosopher, the Western philosopher? I'm sure somebody will point this out, who said the most difficult thing in the world is to sit alone in a room with your own thoughts, something like that. That's basically what zazen is. Thought is a different sort of angle for it. But I got some backlash over this comment, which really surprised me, and including one from a Zen teacher who I respect, who said, oh, I didn't know Buddha's only accomplishment was sitting still. And for one thing, I didn't say it was his only accomplishment, but I did say it was his main accomplishment, and I stand by that. Because sitting still is very difficult, and as Kodo Sawaki said, all of Buddhist philosophy is just a footnote to Zazen. So the Zazen is where the philosophy comes from. So every darn thing that the Buddha accomplished that is noteworthy comes from his ability to sit still. And it's not easy to sit still. Now, one of the things that gets asked a lot kind of around this is, what should we concentrate on? Somebody asked me in this in one of the comments, particularly that string of comments that I was responding to yesterday in yesterday's video, about if Soto Zen students of Zen in the Soto school don't concentrate on koans, what do they concentrate on? And everybody asks that question. But here's my answer. And this kind of surprised me when I decided to look into it, because I've long been familiar with Nishijima Roshi's translation of Fukan Zazengi, which is, let's make sure I get this right, Universal Guide to the Standard Method of Zazen, Fukan Zazengi. That's not how everybody translates that title, but it's a decent translation of the title. Other people give it different titles in English. But there's a line in here which says, and this is the translation in this book, this sitting in Zazen that Dogen has been describing up until this point in the piece is not learning Zen concentration. So that always stuck in my mind, that sitting Zazen is not learning Zen concentration. But when I looked it up this morning, I found online a different version. I didn't go into digging into this, but it's supposedly the Nishijima cross translation of of Fukan Zazengi, and it says something more along the lines of, this sitting Zazen is not, well, let me get it right for you. This version, the other version that I found online, says, what is called sitting Zazen is not learning Zen meditation. So I was like, oh, that's weird. There's two different Nishijima cross translations of this, and one contains the word concentration and the other one doesn't. So I had a look at the footnote, because this line is footnoted. And it says, Sekimon Rinkan Roku relates how historians listed Master Bodhidharma alongside people who were learning Zen concentration. And the word they give as Zen concentration, which they put in the footnotes nicely, is Shuzen. And if you look up the two characters used to make the word Shuzen, I think you make it with a long U sound, is learning meditation. So the first character is to learn, the second character is to meditate. Zen means to meditate. And most people, when I went online looking at other translations of Fukan Zazengi, do give this line as it is not learning Zen. It is not learning meditation. But apparently this has a historical provenance. Is that the word? It's historically whatever. He says, see chapter 30, Gyoji, paragraph 130. In his commentary, Master Dogen says, Master Bodhidharma sat in stillness facing the wall, but he was not learning Zen concentration. That's how it's translated in the footnote here. But doing a little bit more detective work, I did look up in the next volume, volume 2 of the Nishijima Cross Shobogenzo, and I looked up that paragraph, and it says, Sekimon's Rinkan Roku, which, what is Rinkan Roku? Forest Records, published in 1107. It has 2 volumes containing over 300 fascicles, describing the words, deeds, and teachings of Buddhist patriarchs. So it says Bodhidharma first went to China and blah, blah, blah. Then it says he just sat in stillness facing the wall. Only that. He was not practicing Zen meditation. So here, I'm assuming they're translating the word Shuzen. I tried looking it up. My eyes went bonkers trying to find the characters. But I think I'm on solid ground here, assuming that it's the same word, Shuzen. He was not practicing Zen meditation. There, you can see it for yourself. So, I think the intent is clear, that Zazen is not a practice of concentration. I think this is what they are trying to say here. And perhaps, I don't know, Nishijima Roshi isn't alive to ask but perhaps when they were revising the translation, they thought they better give it a more literal reading than the more interpretive reading. So the more interpretive reading that they gave it originally is Zen concentration. But I think that's what it means. So it's not about concentration. It's not about concentrating your mind on a single point. This is what is usually thought of when people think, I don't know, I say usually, but this is sort of the general understanding of what meditation means for a long time, especially here in the West, but also in India and other places, was that meditation means concentrating your mind on a single point, this single-pointed samadhi, where you just go into one thing. You know, you look at a mandala, or you concentrate on a certain word, like a syllable, like a mantra, or you concentrate on a koan, and use the koan almost as a mantra, and concentrate yourself on this single point. And by concentrating on this single point, you have the meditation experience. And a lot of people find Zazen frustrating because they can't concentrate on the single point. And I'll even admit that I've gotten into this myself. I remember one time I was at one of the Great Sky Sessions, which is something they used to do in Minnesota, and they were 7-day sessions, and I went to 2 or 3 of them. But I remember sitting there, and they would do this thing in the mornings, which is kind of a traditional practice in Zen temples that really my teacher never did, but it's a tradition, where they ring a bell to indicate, what is it to indicate? It's either to indicate time or to indicate something that's going on, but it's happening during Zazen. And the hits of the bell are supposed to be 50 seconds apart. I think that's it, like not quite a minute. So the person who's assigned to do this has to sit there with a watch, watching the hand, and then when it gets to 50 seconds, ring the bell, and then count another 50 seconds, 50, not 15, 50 seconds, and then ring the bell again. But anyway, I was sitting there knowing that this was a 50-second, and I was seeing if I could make my mind kind of free from random thoughts between one ring of the bell and another, which is 10 seconds less than a minute, 50 seconds. Couldn't do it. Could not do it. And this is at a point when I'd been practicing Zazen for decades. This is only about 10 years ago, I think. So I'd been practicing a lot already by that time, and I still didn't have that concentration. I'd had all those, special experiences and stuff that I've written about in books and talked about on this channel, but still couldn't get that concentration thing going. And I imagine there are people who can, but to me, just it seems like an athletic feat, so it's something you can learn to do, but is it the point of this practice? And I would say no, that is not the point of Zazen practice, is not to get that single pointed concentration. And like I say, after nearly 40 years of Zazen, I still can't get single pointed concentration. And Ziggy's trying to upset my concentration by barking. Anyway, but slightly tangentially related to that, I wanted to bring up something that I found was kind of useful in Zen practice. There are many, many ways to look at what you're doing in Zazen practice. And as people who regularly watch this video channel know, I've been really getting into reading stuff by Nisargadatta Maharaj, who is not a Zen teacher, but much of what he says, even though he comes from completely outside the Zen tradition, sounds an awful lot like Dogen and an awful lot like what we say in the Zen tradition. So I just find it really fascinating that there's this guy who's an outlier of the tradition. Probably he died in 1980, which would mean, he's probably worldly enough to know that there was something called Zen out there, but he never talks about it, so I doubt he knew anything. I don't think he studied Zen teaching. He just came across his own style of meditation that happens to seem very much like Shikantaza style Zazen to me. And here is what he says, which I find quite interesting. Now, like a lot of teachers in the Advaita tradition, the subject is often giving up bodily identity. And even though he uses the words giving up bodily identity, I can sense from reading what he's saying about it is he's not meaning that you're trying to separate body, which is matter, from mind, which is immaterial, and go into that. It's something a bit different. It's something more subtle than that. And the questioner in this question asks, it is very difficult to give up this attraction to the bodily identity. And Maharaj answers, you have to find out what this body is, then the job is done. Initially, the body is very minute. The consciousness appears in the body, and then the tiny body changes into a large one. Interesting way to put it. That causal body, this is another kind of formula that they use in this tradition that we don't use in the Buddhist tradition. I haven't heard anybody talk about causal body in the Buddhist tradition. Ziggy, can you be quiet for a minute? Okay. Ziggy, okay. That causal body, which is very minute, needs to be known. By meditation, you can know it. The quality of that causal body takes on the appearance of the consciousness and the form. In this world, there are many species. There's Ziggy. In all sizes. Initially, what is the size of each variety? These are interesting questions. At the point where you first feel knowingness, consciousness is not static. It is a continuous state, just like a wheel moving. And here's the metaphor that I found really interesting. The center of the wheel, the axle, is not moving. Well, yeah, you could say the axle is moving, but he's talking about the very, very center. And he's using it metaphorically, too. He's not talking about an actual wheel. The center of the wheel, the axle, is not moving. As you proceed from the center of the axle outwardly, the movement increases, does it not? Similarly, the beginning of consciousness is like the center of a wheel. That point is steady, constant. In a human being, that is the most constant principle. Since the day I was born until I am dead, that consciousness principle is there at that center. As you merge into the world, the movement increases. Watch that center point. Watch that movement of consciousness. Chaitanya and Chetana, that central stationary point of the wheel, watches the movement of consciousness. The one that observes the movement is almost stationary. To bring about the actions of the world, the movement, consciousness must descend. If there is no consciousness, there is no worldly movement. Similarly, you must become stabilized in a more stationary position near the center. When you leave that center point, the movement takes over. And that's the end of the dialogue. But I found that a very kind of useful metaphor to look at Zazen, and I've been looking at my Zazen recently through that metaphor of seeing the very center that seems to witness everything that goes on chaotically around it without getting too much involved in the chaos. And you can do this. It takes a while to get to where you can do this, but you can do this no matter how much chaos is going on. It doesn't matter. There is always the still center. And the metaphor that I've used before I even read this that is similar to this is the idea of silence, that silence always underlies everything. So silence is kind of like the floor, and you can pile as much trash as you want up on top of the floor, but there's still a floor there, and that floor is silence. That's my metaphor. So I found that kind of interesting, and maybe that's useful to you if you're worried about concentration in Zazen. Don't worry about being really concentrated. It's not about being really concentrated. And if you're not concentrated, you're still doing Zazen. Doesn't matter. Even if you're flummoxed and everything's going crazy, it's still Zazen. It's still worth doing. So there you go. That's how to concentrate in Zazen. Bait and switch, isn't it? Anyway, if you want to help me do more bait and switches or buy more $7 shirts at Ross Dress for Less, you can send a donation by going to the URL you're seeing on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. There you will find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. Those are my main and usually only ways of making a living and buying more goofy shirts. So I really appreciate your support, but as always, this is offered for free, so you don't gotta donate if you don't want to donate. And if you don't want to see these crazy shirts anymore, don't donate. Anyway, we will see you again. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Hey Ziggy. Ziggy, how you doing in the sunbeam there? You enjoying that sunbeam? It's warm, huh? It's nice there. Alright, have fun in the sun, Ziggy. I'll see you later.